Thank you. Thanks for having me. And Kara and I have known each other a long time. She used to invite me to her office down in Highland, and so that's when that was a long time ago. But anyway, thanks again. Good turnout. How many people online do we know, Justin? Just so I know how nervous to be? I don't know.
How nervous do you want to be? I like that. 135.
Fantastic. Woohoo. So, welcome everybody online. I hope connections are solid. And wow. I'm going to obviously take questions as we go. Don't let me get ahead of you. It's really important to not miss anything. And I can promise you that there will be 2, maybe 3 things that I am going to have to repeat. And so please don't think it's just you. I've been doing this now, as Kara was mentioning, at least once a day, sometimes twice a day. I didn't even get Friday off last week. And so we are very close to determining what the typical questions are. So I can anticipate some of the questions, and I will do that. On the other hand, some of this does get a little complicated. And so I'm not averse at all to repeating a point or two just to make sure that has sunk in. The other thing that's what we will do. What we won't do is relitigate how we got here, because that's just not productive. And so, and there's nothing we can do about it. And we all have very strong feelings. If you followed the trial and NAR's negotiating strategy and their defense strategy, there's a lot of second guessing going on, and we're not going to do that. But I will tell you that before we start, we call it the settlement agreement, and we've dropped the word proposed. And I was really adamant about keeping that word, because the settlement agreement, as we are implementing it, I don't want to scare anybody, but it's not a done deal yet. It's still a proposed settlement. And the Department of Justice doesn't love the settlement. There are some, what I understand, I've not heard this or read it, so I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, but what I have heard is that some of the plaintiffs aren't in love with the settlement. As it becomes more and more known to us, and as we are developing our responses to it, there are some loopholes in there, frankly, between us friends, and they're being exploited as we speak. And we're going to exploit them because they agreed to it, right? The plaintiffs and their lawyers agreed to this. So if we can say, oh, well, the settlement agreement says this, so we're allowed to do this, whether you like it or not, that's what you agreed to, right? And there are some of those, and we're going to talk about those. So I'm not averse to that because they agreed to it. The plaintiffs themselves, are now seeing this. They're now doing the math, finally. And I'll tell you, I don't know about you, but a lot of us have in the past become aware of class action lawsuits. And has anybody ever gotten a check, like they were part of a class action lawsuit? Do you remember how much it was? Yeah, how much was? Like $750, right? And it's like, congratulations. I remember the first time I got it, I was just a kid. And I never cashed it. It was like for $2.13 or what that. As it's not even worth it to me to go to the bank, because this is before you could take a picture of a check, right? You had to go to the bank. I was like embarrassed to go to the bank to deposit it too. I just kept it taped to the wall or something. I remember I never even cashed it. So the plaintiffs are figuring out, now that the settlement fund, right, is over $600 million. Between NAR's 400, then all the other companies that have settled and paid into the fund, it's well over $600 million. So the plaintiffs, they're lucky, I think, if they're going to get, what I call dinner and a movie. And they're kind of figuring that out now, that the lawyers, what do they charge? 33 1/3%. You know what's fascinating when we talk about price fixing? If you wanted to even have somebody analyze the potential for a class action lawsuit, an antitrust class action lawsuit, and you interviewed 10 law firms, I guarantee you that 10 out of 10 will charge exactly the same thing. But somehow that's not price fixing. Right? The other thing you have to keep in mind, because this is just, is she locked out? A proposed settlement, that the judge could be hearing all this, the plaintiffs could be filing all of these briefs and all of these responses. We know that this judge is a plaintiff-friendly judge. I mean, he was a plaintiff's antitrust attorney before being appointed to the bench, so that's why every ruling he made favored the plaintiffs. Well, that happens if I'm not on the screen. The feed goes out.
I'll let you take care of that one.
Well, no, this is just, oh, I had to sign in. So, well, I did already once. So we don't know what the judge is going to do. Again, I don't want to scare anybody, but my job is to look ahead, right? And not just to, what do they say? Expect the best, plan for the worst. The worst case scenario is the judge figures out that this settlement's not as great as they thought it was, and he could make them go back to the drawing board. And everything we've been doing for the last 6 weeks and the next 3 weeks just goes away, and we have to start all over. That is worst case scenario, and I'm hoping that doesn't happen on one level. On another level, who knows? Maybe it could even be better for us at the end. Yeah. No, the jury verdict is in, and the settlement agreement is done. There's no going back unless there's a whole new trial. So, and I don't think anybody wants that. And so, here we are. So this is in front of us, and we have the job for the next 4 weeks. I guess just under 4 weeks. I heard somebody asking about the 17th and the 14th. The settlement agreement says no later than the 17th. Bright MLS made that choice. They wanted to implement the practice changes in the middle of the week. They didn't want to wait till the weekend for whatever reason. I mean, it's just what they did. Yeah, I guess, I don't know. But that was a Bright MLS decision, okay? The other thing I won't do today is talk about Bright. Their policies, you all know, a lot is changing. And we're not going to, we have to talk a little bit about what is in Bright, right, and the changes that they did make, but not the process that led up to them making those changes. We're on the same page now, but we haven't always been. And so we're in communication with them, and that we'll get through this, right? If you have a question about a Bright field or a Bright policy or a Bright form, you have to call them, okay? Now, let's get started on the substance of it. The first thing we have to do because of these changes is make sure that if any brokerage agreements are in place on the 13th, that they have to be amended to be in compliance. When the new one comes out, they will already have signed one, so they need to sign amendments. Buyers and sellers, if you suspect that any deal is not going to close before the 13th, then you need to have these amendments signed by the buyers and the sellers so that on the 14th, this takes effect, right? The changes take effect. So the way it's written, as you can see, it says, no matter when you sign it, it's effective 12:01 a.m. on the 14th. So you can have this signed today and not effective until the 14th. Okay, so if you suspect that you're still going to be working with that buyer or seller on the 14th, get this amendment signed. And it really doesn't matter, because if you get it signed and you settle, that client buys or sells prior to then, it doesn't matter. Does everybody follow that? Okay, yeah. So if you're doing a listing agreement today, you have to sign the current listing agreement. And you can get this amendment signed. That's an excellent question. Does everybody hear that? So if you're getting a listing agreement or buyer representation agreement signed today, I'd have them sign both documents, the current representation agreement and the amendment. That's a very good point. Thank you.
What if you under contract and then close on August?
No, if you're under that's great. Another good question. If you're under contract today, not closing until after the 14th, it doesn't matter. You don't have to have the amendment signed. And the reason for that is because you have accepted the offer of compensation in the MLS. Right? So even on the 13th, if you submit an offer on the 13th, that's accepted. And on the 13th, there's still that offer of cooperation and compensation in Bright. And you procure a successful buyer for that property, you're operating under the old rules. Everybody, that's two very, very good questions. Thank you. And so, yeah.
How does this affect listings for rentals?
It's same thing. These rules apply to sales or rentals. And because it says in the existing agreements, it says seller means landlord, buyer means tenant. So it applies to rentals as well. Okay? So what was interesting when we put this out, it has the amendment key, and it tells you if you go to paragraph 4 of the brokerage agreement, and you can see at the top where you have to check the box, right? Whether it's a sale, a lease, or unimproved land. You see that at the top? So you have to check which kind of brokerage agreement it is that you're amending. Does everybody see that? That's the answer to the question over here. Now, we put this amendment key in here, and we understand, like when you see this, it looks like a red line version. It looks like a draft, right? And when we put these out, it didn't occur to me that people were saying, why are you giving me the draft? Where's the clean copy, right? Because we're used to getting red line versions that are just drafts. But what we wanted to do is make sure that you didn't have to sit there. If we did the clean copy, like we accepted all the changes, right? You know how you do that? Accept all changes. Let's say all that stuff went away and was replaced by this language, but it wasn't highlighted. You wouldn't know that unless you sat there with the existing agreement and the new one and word by word and found a word that's different. We didn't want people to have to do that. We wanted them to be able to identify the paragraph and the changes in the existing agreement versus the amended version. So this is very purposeful. And it's funny that we've gotten comments and questions like, can I get a clean copy? No. Because imagine how confusing that would have to be to go line by line, right? So this was very purposeful, okay? The one thing, so that the paragraph 4 changes, that's just very technical. Don't even really necessarily worry about that. The same thing here. This is Bright. Bright said we don't display, we distribute information. So again, a lot of things are just cleaning up wording and technical to make sure that we're using the same language that Bright is using. Of very critical importance to you, something that I hope you've already seen, is the new Bright form, the MLS disclosures and seller landlord options form. Has everybody seen that? Okay, so you know what that looks like. If you haven't, go to Bright's website or get I'm sure, yeah, that the company is going to provide for you. You really have to have that open, or on the desk when you're filling out the listing agreement. And even today, I would do that even just to get some practice on it, but some of those fields are there now. And we'll talk about that, like the seller concession field, things like that. So that is really a marketing plan, right? And if you know the form, it's got like what the property is, what the status is, and then the options. Does everybody understand that? I think there's like 5 options, just a regular listing. Coming soon. We are not talking about whether that's a good idea or not to eliminate the 21-day limit on coming soon. That is a Bright policy decision. You have input on that or reaction to that. It's called Bright. But as you know, there's 2 options, coming soon with internet, coming soon without. And then this other thing that we still call office exclusive. And again, they've changed some of the rules. And there's a lot of discussion out there about what it even means to be an office exclusive listing anymore. And again, that's a Bright question. And any questions, concerns, et cetera, about office exclusives, those should be directed toward Bright. Okay? The other thing that is pretty significant is the new seller concessions field in Bright. So who's put a new listing into Bright in the last 3 weeks? Okay. Do you remember seeing the seller concessions field? Okay. Did you use it? You didn't use it. Didn't use it. Didn't use it. Nobody's been using it. Not really surprised by that, because when we first became aware that there was now a seller concessions field in Bright, our first reaction was, do we really need that? Because seller concessions are pretty common anyway, right? Buyers are asking for seller concessions. What's interesting is that as you travel around, and I don't know how common it is in this market, I go one place, like Anne Arundel County, I talk about seller concessions, and everybody's like, oh yeah, almost every one of our buyers asked for seller concessions. I went up to Cecil County last week, and they said, basically, what's that? Like, they just don't use them. They don't. Their buyers don't ask for seller concessions up there. So I have to ask, like, how common are they in your market? And so, not that that matters, but you'll tell me. And so, when you did you happen to look at that field at all? And did you put your mouse over it? What happened when you scrolled your mouse over the seller concessions field in Bright? What happened? Remember? Didn't a box pop up? A little box popped up. What did it say? Do you remember? What it said was, seller concessions are available whether the field is filled in or not, and they are really 2 kinds. It doesn't say it exactly this way, which we did, but it says, in effect, seller concessions can be used to pay closing costs, and closing costs can include buyer broker compensation. So that's what that little pop-up box says as you scroll over the field. Okay, everybody with me? Now, that's important because, as you'll see in a little while, there are options. And so this is one option, and I'll dig into that a little bit deeper. So really, the seller has options here. Disclose right up front to prospective buyers that you are willing to accept an offer that includes a request for concessions, or not. A lot of people are leaving it blank, which I'm saying is permission for buyers to ask for concessions. This, because it's a non-mandatory field, I don't think you need to see yes in order to include a request for concessions in the offer. Does that make sense? Now, frankly, even if it says no, and it's been less than a month. I think tomorrow it'll be 4 weeks that it's been out there. No one's told me yet that the seller has said no. So I'm not really sure. And the people that have said that some sellers are checking yes, no seller is including the top, amount. And when I first saw this, I'm violating what I said I was going to not do, but a lot of us thought to ourselves, if I was a seller, even if I checked the box saying yes, why would I give away? You know what I mean? Like, because if you're a buyer's agent and the seller says check yes, 5%, what are you going to put in the offer? All right, so why would you negotiate against yourself? And then suppose it was a bad offer, like below asking, and they're still asking for 5%, then you counter at 3 or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Then the buyer comes back and says, no, you were willing to consider it. Yeah, I did consider it, and I rejected it. So it never really, and Bright, to their credit, has said, look, they're going to look at all this. Now, I asked about data just, again, Thursday, and the Bright rep didn't have hard numbers. Because I asked, we have almost a month of experience here. How many sellers are checking anything in this box? And we don't have the numbers, right? But now we have, in a month, I mean, how many listings go into Bright every single month? Several thousand, right? So I would like to have that data to share, but I just don't. Then I guess I got to touch it like how long was that? 5 minutes? Okay. I'll just move it even if I don't have to, right? So that's the conversation you're going to have. Again, if you can do this today, right? You don't even need this. But when you go to do a listing today even, you can say what you're feeling on concessions, because again, this field is live today. But it's not in the listing agreement until the 14th. So then you have compensation. Now, I have to tell you, with discussing compensation with sellers now, and the reason I'm doing this first is because compensation with buyers is a lot more complicated. So that's why I like to do the listing side first. But it's different than it is today, because if I say it fast, it really doesn't sound that bad. Cooperative compensation, in other words, as a seller, authorizing the listing broker to share compensation with the buyer's broker has not gone away. Despite what people think and all that bad information that consumers have today, right? Because they're going to have read something on CNN or saw some stupid interview with somebody who doesn't know this business, and they're going to come up to you and say, hey, I'd like to maybe hire you to list my property. I hear you work for free now. Right? So let's go, right? And you're like, oh my God, stop reading the news, stop watching anything, because they're all wrong. They're all wrong. The Daily Record, which is the legal newspaper, called us the other day for an article. This is the paper of record in the legal field in Maryland. The Daily Record, the newspaper for lawyers. And they called and interviewed us and our president, Chris Hill, and some of our members. And the first line of this article said, because something along the lines of, because of a settlement, or in light of the settlement agreement between the National Association of Realtors and the plaintiffs in the transaction lawsuit that resulted in the elimination of the 6% commission, buying a house and selling a house now is going to change. The very first sentence was demonstrably, objectively wrong. And then I scrolled down. I read it. I was like so pissed, but I read it anyway. And then I get to the bottom where the byline was up there. And I got to the bottom. Turns out the person who wrote that article is an intern at the Daily Record, this young person. And I have not written a response yet, although I think I'm going to go back to the office and finally bite the bullet and write a response, because it was irresponsible of them. So think about how, and you probably already have seen it, and having a conversation with a consumer, that they just don't understand it. They've been given so much bad information. So our job, one, now and for the foreseeable future, is explaining to people how this industry actually works, right? And so now on the listing side, it's probably going to be a little bit easier, because you can still offer cooperative compensation. You just can't put it on the MLS. I mean, fundamentally, that's the only change we're making, right? So when you think of it that way, it's like, well, what's the problem, right? Well, of course, it's a big problem because now, okay, even if I do offer cooperative compensation, how do I communicate that to buyer's agents, right? And so that's your job as a listing agent. Number one, explain to the seller the pluses and minuses. And this is important, then I'll get to your question. I'm going to use this term a lot. Informed consent. Informed consent means that you have given your clients information that they need to make an informed decision. And informed consent means both positive and negative implications of the decision they are about to make. Informed consent means everything from the best outcome to the worst. The pluses and the minuses. If you've had any medical procedures recently, right before your procedure, they had you sign a little something, right? Remember that? That's called your consent, right? Did you read it? Anybody read their consent form recently? Well, you're going to have to sign it or they won't operate on you. But you know what it says? You could die. You could be great, and that's the outcome we hope for, but you could die. So they've given you the pros and the cons, right? That's what you need to do. We need to ensure that consumers understand the business. That's our job. And how compensation works, of course. And so, thank you. Keep an eye on that for me. Please don't make me log in again. Oh, good. Okay. Woo! So, just have to touch it, yeah. So here's where that comes in. Because, yes, we have established our compensation. Now, you really have to have this conversation about concessions and compensation and cooperation all at the same time. These are puzzle pieces that all have to fit together, and they are not necessarily mutually exclusive. They could work together, and we'll talk about that on the buyer side. So when you agree on your commission, right, I love this set, it's negotiable. Of course it is. It always was. But negotiable does not mean that when you say, I work for X percent, and the seller in this case says, will you work for X minus 0.5%? Guess what? You can say no. Guess what you just did? You just negotiated. Antitrust means that Kara can't call Nick D'Ambrosia and say, don't charge less than 6%. That's illegal price fixing. But you, charging what you charge and nothing less, that's not illegal. You just negotiated, and you said no. Now, if they want to go down the street, where's the nearest company to here? Anybody know? Who's exit? So, exit, HomeSmart. I'm going to go down to HomeSmart and see if I can talk them into working for cheaper. Great, that you should. Right? That's what negotiable means. Negotiable does not mean you have to work for less than you work for. Does not mean that at all. And so I talked to I was doing a presentation, and the broker, who also still lists and sells, had an interview with a prospective seller, and this person gave the seller the spiel. Said, this is the way we do it. This is what I charge. This is what I do for you. This is how it's going to work. These are your options. And the seller said, her name's Patty. Patty, you're the 10th realtor I've interviewed. And you're the only one that explained it to me in a way I can understand. Where do I sign? And she got that listing. This is powerful stuff. Knowing your value, knowing your worth, standing up for yourself, especially on the buyer side, which we're going to talk about, but even on the listing side. This is not my fingernail painting money. This is how I support my family. Right? Thank you. My wife gave me that one. I support my family. I pay my own mortgage. I put my kids through school. And this is not just a side hustle. And so we have to own that, and we have to be proud of it, and show our value and our worth. I charge this, and I'm worth it. Remember that old hair color commercial? Anybody else? Anybody with hair? You might remember. I'm sorry, man. What's your name? I'm sorry. Donald? He doesn't remember that. L'Oreal, right? It's maybe cost a little more, but I'm worth it. Remember that? You don't even have to say I cost a little more. This is what I charge, and I'm worth it, right? And so this is the new reality. So assuming we get that, we talk to the buyers, the sellers in this situation, there are pluses and minuses to cooperative compensation, right? The positives are, hey, look, buyers are still out there, strapped for cash, depending on where you are in the market, et cetera. You might very well be increasing your prospective pool of buyers if you're offering compensation, right? Negative, yeah, guess what? Your net goes down a little bit, right? As opposed to not offering compensation. If you don't offer compensation, expect maybe a buyer request for concessions to pay the broker anyway, right? On the buyer side, cooperative compensation, guess what? At least there's certainty. So if I'm the buyer's agent and I find out that, yeah, I look at the listing and I find out, and we'll talk about how we communicate that, now my buyer knows already that there is some or all of my compensation being paid for, and then there is at least certainty. Now we talk about concessions. If we use concessions to pay the buyer's broker, we're not going to know what that is till the very end of the negotiations, right? And I'll connect all these dots in a second, I promise. So when I come around to the buyer side and some of the new addenda. So you have to be, these two things have to work, right? Because if you have a percent of sale price there and you are offering compensation, then that has to be communicated. Now, it can't be communicated on the MLS. So where's it going to go? How are buyer's agents going to know that you are offering compensation? The seller, through you, is offering compensation to buyer's brokers. It's not on the MLS like it is today. Where's it going to go? How are you going to know? I would say, well, the website, really, because this is not part of the offer yet, right? You're going to have to put it on a website somewhere. Bright will, in the agent remarks, not public remarks, in the agent remarks, you can put a URL. They have said that. So if that property, you have a website for that property, you can put that URL in the agent remarks, and prominently, if I'm a buyer's agent, I go to that website, I could see, you can say, offering X cooperative compensation to buyer's brokers, or whatever those magic words, something like that. Okay, work with the company to decide on how that's going to be worded, but you get the idea. So that's the first place on that website. Yeah. You can call, yeah, of course. So that's option one, right? The second is social media. Any outlet, anywhere you put that property, you can, mention it. Okay? The third option, call the listing agent. And then hope you get a response. So as I do this and I say that, 100% of the time, it gets a little bit of a laugh. Oh yeah, right, because listing agents are so responsive. I can tell you, if they're not doing their job, which is to protect and promote the seller's best interest. So if listing agents are unresponsive, shame on them, number one. So if you are a listing agent, respond. A buyer's agent, that means they have a prospective buyer, and you do want to sell that house, right? So respond. And if you have an unresponsive listing agent, call the broker or manager. and say, you know, what the heck? Or words to that effect. Yeah.
So, my confusion is like, I feel like marketing a listing is not supposed to be about the commission.
Right.
And if we can just call the listing, right, then we can advertise on social media, it doesn't even mean, that's not like still violating the trust because now we're showing what we're paying for this.
Yeah. It's not price fixing. It could be steering. So there's two parts to the settlement. The one is the accusation that we fixed prices. And I'm going to editorialize here for a minute. I wish I could stand up here and say we never did that. We never fixed prices, and we never steered buyers toward properties based on the compensation I was going to receive. I truly wish I could say we've been wrongly accused of both of those things. I can't, because we did. We did all those things. We did both of those things. And in Prince George's County, are we in Prince George's County? Yes. Right here, in Prince George's County, in the 1960s, and the settlement was 1970. Prince George's County Association of Realtors entered into an agreement with the Department of Justice for price fixing. So if you were in a broker in Prince George's County in the 60s up till 1970, the only way you could get a listing agreement was to go to the PG Car office, the front desk. There was a stack of them. And you grabbed a bunch. And it said 6%. Every broker in Prince George's County agreed to charge the same amount, 6%. That is classic price fixing. That was a no-brainer price fixing. That was a no-brainer lawsuit for the DOJ to file against PG Car. And then they agreed to a settlement and prohibited that practice. And then brokers for literally only about 10 years ago had to discount their commissions. Okay? And so, and steering, I wish I could say, but it happened to me personally a long time ago when I wasn't even in real estate. And basically, you know, I was told that, you know, the amount of buyers going to see your house is almost completely dependent on how much compensation you're offering to the buyer's agent. So we did this, right? We are not perfect. We are not blameless. We are not just victims here. So how do we fix that? Well, this, number one, make sure that people are open to negotiation on your commissions. Have this conversation. Whatever you charge, percent of sale price, and a flat dollar amount or a flat dollar amount. Those are your options. One of those, not more than one, just one. Okay? Now, this obviously has to be the same kind of conversation, or these pieces have to be talked about together, because if the decision is to, you know, charge whatever we charge, then what is the effect on this number if there's cooperative compensation or not? Right? And that doesn't really change. I mean, today, if I put my number in here, percent of sale price, right? And we offer compensation to buyers, brokers, but there isn't one, right? As an unrepresented buyer, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, what happens? You keep it, right? Cha-ching, right? It's called both sides. And now that's still an option. It really is. But that's the conversation you have to have with seller. And if they agree on this percent amount and not this, did they agree to not cooperate, this number might be different. Does everybody see how that could work? So that's why so 14 and 15 really have to work together in the conversation with sellers about compensation. And then if the seller agrees to X% as your commission as the listing agent, listing broker, no cooperative compensation, then our job is to say, well, fine, but you're almost guaranteed to receive in the offer a request for concessions to help pay for the buyer's broker. Everybody follow that? That's how I see this unfolding. Okay. The other thing is, I usually say at the very beginning, don't listen to anybody who makes predictions, because these podcasts and these so-called experts are all predicting. None of them know. Don't listen to any of them. They don't know anything. And I'm going to make a prediction. But can't help myself. What's that? I think you'll agree with me.
So, excuse me, Chuck. So,
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't get back to you. I'm sorry.
that's fine. So on 14, that's, for 14, that's just is it the total or just the list?
It's the total.
The total.
It's the
Okay.
total. And again, if the seller is agreeing to compensate the buyer's broker, this number could be different than if they didn't. Right? If there's fee splitting, this number is probably going to be higher. If there's none, it might be lower. It depending on what you negotiate with the seller. That's just the dynamic of that negotiation. Okay? My prediction is we are going to see an increase. I don't know how many, but I believe that there will be more unrepresented buyers in the market. I really do. I think that's pretty safe. How many? I don't know. When we get to the buyer side, what's that? Well, yes. So here's the thing. That is a trap, and we know that. Who has worked with an unrepresented buyer in the last? Okay, my same two friends back here. Okay, I'm gonna pick on you now. What's your name? Cortland. Oh, I like that. Cortland, was it recently? Maybe in the last couple years? Okay. Your listing, right? Unrepresented buyer calls you on your listing, right? On the phone, probably on the phone, contacted you first or email or something. First thing you say is what? Let him, Cortland is on the hot seat. First thing you say, she told you. I would like you to delve into that a little more, because we know that there are some people working without having buyer agency agreements signed, and I have very strong feelings about that, and I'll share with you in a minute. The real question you should be asking is, have you signed written buyer agency? And it really has to be an exclusive. But imagine that. Imagine consumer X calls me and says, I'd like to see your listing. Have you signed an exclusive buyer representation agreement? Click. Right? Or you're in person and their eyes start to glaze over, they fall asleep on you. But that's because the Code of Ethics specifically says, and Maryland law says, that it is a violation of Maryland law and the Realtor Code of Ethics to interfere with an exclusive representation agreement clients have with other realtors. I don't know, do I like mouse or touch? I don't know. It's not a mouse. Let's say screen. That's our safe word. We need a safe word. So you see where I'm going with that? Okay, so this buyer, and they said no. And as far as we know, since it's settled and you didn't have an arbitration, that they weren't lying. Buyers are liars. So they weren't lying. You showed them the house. When you met them at the house, what's the next thing you did?
Well, I told them that I didn't have no.
Okay, you missed a step. Cortland, what did you do? What did you do? First face-to-face, what did you do? Thank you for acting like that was a stupid question. I really do thank you for that, because because you work here and they train you. So not every place I go, people go, well, of course I did. I have to almost explain it to them. So you got understanding who real estate agents represent, and they signed it or whatever. And then what happened?
Well, that's why I'm going to much for that, I
Yeah.
can't.
Right. And I would have gone further by saying, not only can I not do that, I can't do anything for you. Except when we go to sit down, if you are going to make an offer, I will sit with you and I will show you the blanks on the screen to fill out a contract of sale so you can make an offer on this property. That is it. What do we call those? Does anybody remember what we call those? Ministerial acts. You can sit at the computer and fill it out for them because, yeah, you're in, what forms vendor do you have? Dotloop, right? So you pull up your template and there's the contract and whatever. But, and it worked, I guess, right? And because they were somewhat sophisticated, had they done this before? They're a little experienced. They're invest. Oh, well, duh, that was your lucky day, right? Most of them are not going to be. Any of you guys, did you have relatively unsophisticated buyers? And did it work out? Did they get frustrated when you said, I can't tell you that? Should have got a home inspection? I don't know. Yay. Yay, because I got so frustrated because you couldn't do anything for them. Then you finally said, I got a great buyer's agent. She's just a couple. Yeah, fantastic. That is the best outcome, right? Because it's a trap. Because they're going to want us to step over that line. And that is undisclosed dual agency. And you will lose your license. Because that buyer is going to be disgruntled at some point, right? And I'm going to just tell you, I have zero sympathy for unrepresented buyers. If they go in as adults, unsophisticated especially, and choose to engage in this complex, maybe the most important financial decision they will make in their lifetime, and not have professional help, they get what they deserve. I wish them the worst outcome. Not you. Do you know what I'm saying? I don't have any sympathy for them. Make them frustrated as hell and then say, look, we got people here that do this for a living. You need help, right? And they get help, hopefully. That's the best outcome. Just resist. Resist the urge to help them. That's the message. Yeah. 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 I hope it came crashing and burning on them. I really do. So I guess you get the point, right? I know. You want to know how? Do you really want? So it gets easier from now. No, it doesn't. It gets worse. So that's the listing. This is the listing agreement amendment. This is really all you need to know. I don't need to show you the full listing agreement because when you go to pull up a new listing agreement on the 14th, you'll see the clean version. None of this, all this goes away, and the changes will be incorporated into the document that you pull up on the 14th, okay? Yeah. Seller concessions? Yeah. In Bright, you can leave it blank. Most people are. It's non-mandatory field. And anecdotally, again, I don't have data. Oh, yeah, absolutely. You could just leave it blank. Yeah. Because it says seller may elect. And you could just leave it, and it's non-mandatory. So they can just leave it blank. Yeah. Yeah. We always hope it's going under contract before the 13th. There's no harm in having it signed anyway. There's no harm in it. It just never takes effect. So rather than have to call them back in for signatures or send them a whatever, for e-signature to me. But again, Karen and the company will set that policy. But there's no harm in getting it done, okay? All right, moving on. That's all, everything on the listing side, okay? Now we get to have some real fun. This is our new hard job. There's just no question that our responsibility now is to figure out how we explain to buyers this new world. Because for them it is. For them, it's no longer, hey, pull up a listing, see that broker compensation, and then go on from there with certainty about, even though I've agreed that you will be made, you will make this amount of money for representing me, I don't actually have to pay you that, right? And that's always been a difficult conversation, which is why we didn't do it. I mean, let's be honest. We're the ones who used to say free. We're the ones who put 0 or per MLS. We did that, right? Because how do you get somebody to understand, yeah, I work for you, but I get paid by them, so don't worry about it? That's always been a difficult conversation. And in fact, the plaintiffs, these were the buyers, plaintiffs, because remember, there's like 20 some other lawsuits still out there. On the seller's side, the DOJ is still out there. I just got a news alert that the court allowed the DOJ to open its investigation. It was an appeal because they had an agreement. The DOJ had an agreement with the National Association of Realtors, and they just said, yeah, forget about that. We're reopening this investigation. And NAR sued and said, you can't. We already had a deal that you said finished this investigation, and the court ruled against NAR, and now the appeals court ruled against NAR. So the DOJ is fully investigating all of our practices now, right? And they've made it very clear, by the way, and the Consumer Federation of America have made it abundantly clear. Their vision for this industry: sellers hire their brokers and pay them. Buyers hire their brokers and pay them. That's what they want. And they will not rest until they get that. That years down the line, but their relentlessness gives me pause because they're not going away. These are career people in the DOJ. And look, I'm not going to make a prediction here, but I can tell you we either fight this forever or at some point they win. I don't know how it's going to end. I really don't. But I will say also that the quote-unquote consumer advocates think that that's a good idea also. Right? So we need to at least be thinking about that long term. Yeah. 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 There's no question. There's no question. And so that this is, well, if they're pre-qualified, you know, all that stuff, pre-approved, however they want to approach it, this is still our job. Our job is to say, I earn a living, this is what I do on your behalf, and this is what I earn from representing you in this transaction. And there are 3 possible sources of my compensation. The listing broker, and we're going to check all the listings to see if they're offering compensation. The seller, through concessions. Ultimately, potentially, you, the buyer. 3 potential sources. See, I can't do this. People who do that. I have to like hold my fingers down and see my fingers aren't even straight. I don't know what's with that. I try to do that. No, 3 sources of compensation. The listing broker, which I'm going to know, I'm going to check the website, social media, the listing if there's a URL, call the listing agent, all those things. Seller concessions, whether that, if that's blank or even yes or whatever, the seller concessions. Ultimately, you, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. This is new territory for us. We've never had to have these conversations before, have we? Because buyers so infrequently had to actually pay us. So in order for us to have that conversation, we also need to tell them what I'm going to do for you. That I'm going to work my you-know-what off for you. And here's what I'm going to do. If you saw in the most recent magazine, that little pull-out insert, 152 things realtors do for their clients, that's a good starting point, right? Because it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. And consumers don't necessarily know that coming in. If they've never bought a house before, a lot of this is going to be pretty new to them. And so that cash to close, that's a difficult conversation, but it's going to be one we absolutely have to have. So get your scripts down. Work with your partners. Work with your friends in the office and create these scripts, because you guys have had a lot of these conversations already. What questions are they asking you? How are you answering those questions? How are you approaching this entire new relationship that we now have to have with buyers, centered on the fact that ultimately, at least potentially, you will be responsible for some or all of my compensation. That's the new world we found ourselves in. And we got about 3.5, 4 weeks to get ready for it. And hopefully you're even thinking about that already. Okay? So here's the new reality, which is that if you have any, buyer representation agreements that haven't already followed this, that's going to be another difficult conversation. Hopefully there's no out there with 0 or per MLS, because the settlement agreement says a couple things about compensation. Number one, it's negotiable, whatever. But compensation also has to be objectively quantifiable and specific. And now percent of sale price is okay, but we can't put in here percent of sale price and say whatever else I can manage. You know what I mean? So we get a lot of questions like builder bonuses, because the other thing it says is that I'm not allowed by the settlement agreement. I'm not allowed to receive in compensation anything in excess, anything that exceeds the amount that we have agreed to. So we're getting a lot of questions, and this is to avoid steering, right? So if I agree on what percent or whatever the compensation is to you as the buyer's agent, that's as much as you can accept in compensation from any source. Okay? Somebody sent me the other day a builder's ad that says, hey, buyer agent bonus, right? You've seen these. $5,000 for the first house, $7,500 for the second, $10,000 for the third, and every subsequent buyer you bring to this development. There is an open question. I will tell you, our advice on this, what about, because the typical question next is, well, what about if I just agreed to percent of sale price, and yet they want to see a new home, and the builder's offering a bonus? Can I go in and amend this to include the bonus for that property? Does everybody follow? Which would actually, we are not taking a position on that as of today, because I don't know what NAR's position is. I've heard a couple things. I will tell you this, but don't act on it yet. Because I was told that yesterday, Katie Johnson, who's the chief legal officer for NAR, said yes, if in fact you have an opportunity to make more than this says. I mean, let's say we're all from the same company here, right? Nobody's not affiliated with Samson, so I can talk numbers. These are just examples, okay? Let's say I put in 2% and that's my commission, and the listing broker's offering 2.5 or 3. Technically, I couldn't accept that. But if I go back and amend this to say 2.5 or 3, I heard that Katie Johnson yesterday said that's okay. Don't do that yet. Don't do that yet. Wait for us to get guidance from NAR. If they clarify that and put it in writing, we will send that out to everybody. Okay, but as of today, our response is check with your company, have your company check with their lawyers to see if that's okay and not a violation of the settlement agreement. I'm on the fence about it. So we're not taking a position on that. Correct.
So anything like I said, aside from ending, will it also be given as towards,
Yes, that's what I've been saying. What I've been saying is if you're happy with your compensation and if the listing broker's offering 1% or 0.5% more, if it were me, if the seller has already agreed to pay it and they've already accepted that as their net, I would be including that in a seller concession to help with the buyer's closing costs. Absolutely, yeah. Go ahead, in the back. You can do it. Yeah, look, there are pluses and minuses to that. I get that question a lot. Well, let me put in, 5 here, and then so I'm never at a place where, I'm getting less. Well, the buyers might have something to say about that because part of your conversation is, remember, if I don't get all this from other places, I'm coming after you at closing for the rest. They're going to trust you to say, don't worry about that. We'll amend it at the end so you're not responsible for it. I'm not sure how that would work. So that's something you all have to work out inside this company and with your peers and your brokers and managers, okay?
So for the instance of like a new home sales contract, let's just say you have
Yeah.
2% in the buyer broker agreement, and the builder's offering 2.5%.
Right,
And a bonus.
right.
Can you terminate that buyer broker agreement to another one just specifically for that property?
Yes, you could, absolutely. Or amend this, or have a new one just for that property. Yeah, those are options. Again, your lawyers are going to have to walk you through the steps, but I don't see anything wrong with that. Okay, okay, yeah. Hold on, go ahead. Well, so I have admin fees in Chuck land are not a thing, right? So the real RESPA says that what goes in here is compensation, right? And that's your commission. So if there's a flat fee, that's compensation, fine. But if you call it an admin fee, then RESPA says if you are questioned about that by the regulator, which would be the CFPB or the Attorney General of Maryland Consumer Affairs Division, they would make you tell me what that fee pays for. Specifically, I need a list of activities that you do for me, and that what you are charging me is reasonable fee for file maintenance or whatever, technology fee or whatever is included in that term, admin fee, administrative fee, whatever it is. So we have never recommended using that word. We have always said this is compensation. Percent of sale price, a fat dollar amount, a flat dollar amount. You don't have to call it anything but dollars. That's your compensation, okay? Because once you call it something else, you have to justify it. So that's been our 20 years. That's been our position on best practices as it relates to that fee. Right there, percent of sale price and a flat dollar amount. Okay?
Just don't call it admin fee or flat.
It's not. It's a flat fee.
That's where that amount goes, but it's a flat fee.
Right. It's just compensation. Okay? Yeah, real quick. Whatever it is. Who benefits from the DOJ investigation? Nobody. Nobody. The lawyers. But the DOJ, they're on salary, so they don't care. They should be going after the other. There are other monopolies out there. I wish they would be focused on. This is already one of the most highly competitive industries I know of, and so kind of shame on them to a certain extent. But at the end of the day, look, consumers might. I mean, if I'm being honest and we're talking in a vacuum, and if I was a buyer, because that was one of the the big part of the plaintiff's case, that, I wanted to hire this company to represent me, but I never got to negotiate my fee. Your fee. You were going to charge me something, but you're not even charging me. They're paying you. You're representing me, but paying them. If I had the opportunity to negotiate with you on the fee and it was coming out of my pocket, I would have talked you down. I would have done everything I can to talk you down. That's their world. And in their world, buyers face-to-face with their prospective agents, they see a race to the bottom. They want buyers to price shop and say, well, I'll go down the street and they're only charging 2%. Right? And that will put downward pressure on our commissions in their world. That's how they want it to work. Does that make sense? And maybe they're going to get there. I don't know. But I'm sure if I was a buyer and I had to come out of pocket, there was no other source of your compensation as the buyer's agent, I'd be price shopping, wouldn't you? Don't you get prices for stuff before you buy anything, before you spend a lot of money, right? You want to make sure you're paying the least amount of pounds. I just go to Costco because it's just easy. But if you did, if I had a real negotiation, then I'd probably shop around, and that might be where we go. I'm talking 5, 10 years from now, but something we have to think about, okay? And so there again, we talk about that conversation with the buyer about compensation and the sources of compensation, right? So we already talked about that. 3 sources of compensation. We already talked about the listing broker's offer that I can find on the website, social media, or I call the listing agent, right? Now at least I have certainty, yes or no, right? That helps. Seller concessions are the second potential source of compensation. Now, as we said earlier, the seller concessions have to be, we have to discriminate between or distinguish, I should say, between types of seller concessions. This is where it gets a little tricky. Because seller concessions can take 2 forms. I'm going to stop. I'm going to back up. If there is cooperative compensation, that's the next step. If you find there is cooperative compensation, today in Bright, and according to NAR's rules, that's a blanket unilateral offer of compensation. Those are terms of art in contract law. When you make a unilateral offer and the recipient of that offer performs, you have a contract. We don't have that as of the 14th of August. That goes away. So if there is cooperative compensation being offered, and I do find out about it on the website, social media, phone call, whatever, do we have a deal yet for that compensation? No. So we have to memorialize that agreement. That's what this form is for. Once you are aware as the buyer's agent that there is an offer of compensation from the listing broker, you have to put that in a contract. Anybody do any commercial transactions at all? Okay. In the commercial world, if you know a commercial agent, ask them, and they will tell you, we don't have this. But landlord brokers, listing brokers for sale commercial properties, this is how they do it. And they've done it like this for 75 years or more. They have a separate agreement. And it says if you get, we do things on letter of intent, right, in the commercial world. So we negotiate the overall terms in an LOI. And at the bottom it says commissions will be negotiated separately. Every LOI I've ever seen, number 1, this is not a contract. Number 2, commissions will be negotiated separately. This is that. So once you have, as the buyer's agent, that there is an offer of compensation, you need to get this signed. the timing of this, you're going to have to tell us, because we don't know, because it's so new, when the best time to get this signed. You can get it signed any time prior to entering into the contract, I would think, but I don't even think it matters. It could even be after you're under contract. But I'd want to get it signed sooner rather than later, whether there's a contract or not, because it's dependent on a settlement. So if you get this signed, then, and there's no settlement, there's no harm, no foul. It's just an extra piece of paper, right? But this is an agreement between the brokers that we are confirming the compensation offered by the listing broker to the buyer's brokers or subagents in this amount. Everybody see that? It's pretty simple. It's a simple form. And then everybody signs it. We need listing broker, buyer's broker, seller, and buyer. We need everybody to sign it because the listing that the seller wants to know that someone's accepted the offer. The buyer needs to know because that's money that they ultimately agreed to pay you that now they don't have to pay you as the buyer's agent. So this is an important document. All right? So that you close that loop. Yeah. No, it cannot be at all. And that's why it says at the top, do not go near the MLS with this form. Because the settlement agreement says offers of compensation cannot be indirectly or directly connected to the MLS. So not in showing time, not through a disclosure on MLS, nothing. Completely separate. And it's not part of the contract. This is an agreement between the brokers, okay? Here and then. Well, you get it in writing. That's what you do. But it's not in bright. Okay. Look, sure. Again, the timing of this we'll know by experience, and we're going to be seeking your input over time as to how this is going. We'll be connecting with you monthly to see, are you using, how is this form, when are you getting it signed? Because it's so new, we're going to be relying on you all to give us the input that we need, because these are going to be tweaked. Let's be honest. This was an iterative process, and we're not done. These are not perfect. They are as close as we can get, but we had to get them out, right? And so they're probably going to change over the next 9, 12 months or whatever. Give me 1 second. She was first. Oh, I'm sorry, he was first.
So you stated earlier that you put a link
In the agent's remarks, you could put a URL to your property's website on which you will, yes.
Okay. So that is still right.
That is still Bright, but Bright said, I waited to hear it from them. Their representative last Thursday said, because they asked me, and I said, ask Andrew. He's their rep up in Cecil, Haverford, etc. I said, again, I do not speak for Bright. Andrew said that you can put a URL in the agent remarks. Okay? So I'm throwing him right under the bus. And I did not say that. Andrew said, not Chuck. Yeah. I'm sorry. Hold on.
So if that URL is going to a site that is IDS,
No, it has to be not, yes, it has to be on your site, not the company's site, because they will shut off your IDX feed if they see it. Yes, that's a very good question. Everybody hear that? It can be on the URL to the site should be your site, not the, yeah, for that property. Not, yes, in the back. You cannot use showing time. No, that you did hear me correctly. You cannot use showing time to advertise the offer of compensation. No, you cannot. Yes. Sure, as long as you don't say anything about compensation. Yes, that's okay. Agent remarks. Agent remarks. Okay? Well, that's $1,000, so this is $1,000 every, yes. $1,000 a pop, so, yeah. Go ahead.
But in the agent remarks, for example, how you put the URL.
Yes.
You cannot just say anything like say, oh, check for.
No,
not
no,
the
cannot, at all. Thank you.
Then can you say for more details?
You could, for more details, well, that's inherent in putting a URL in the agent remarks. So to me, that's a waste of, if you want more, for more information, that's a waste of 3 words in my opinion. You know what I mean? But yeah, do it what you know, again, we don't know any of this. We're going to try a bunch of stuff. We're going to make some mistakes. Hopefully we don't get fined $1,000, but we're going to learn over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months, and we're coming out and we're sharing. Whatever you share with us, if you allow us, we will share with the rest of our members as to what's working and what isn't. This is, again, going to be a learning experience for all of us. It really is. Okay, actually, let me move on, unless it's very specific to this. Scream? I'm not going to scream. One more on this. Yeah, but it's not binding, as we know. But yeah. No, I mean, that's a lot of work. You know, to me, I mean, sure, it's okay. That's a company policy, first of all. I think an LOI is fine. Yeah, people do it, you know, but there's nothing illegal about it. You just got to do it right. You know, there was a court case in Maryland where they did not use the magic words in an LOI, and the court said, you have a contract, because you did not say specifically this in big, bold letters, like a good LOI, this is not a contract. We are not bound by this until it's formalized in a binding agreement, blah, blah, blah. And that language was not in that LOI. The court said you have a contract, not a letter of intent. So be very, very careful. Again, I'll leave that up to company policy, okay?
So the listing broker is going to fill this out. This comes from.
I think the buyer's agent's going to fill this out because it says the buyer. Oh, that's the listing brokers. Okay. Oh, this is the wrong one. Oh, shit. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Okay, fine.
This is the wrong one. Oh, my God. I thought I had $1,000. Oh, my God. I'm so sorry. I thought I got it off the, all right, talk amongst yourselves. Oh, I'm not connected to the internet anymore. Yeah, you know what?
Following
Yeah, we're good.
You were,
Good.
so,
conversation.
Yes.
all right, forget that. When you pull up this form on our website, it's different than that. And what it says is that this is the buyer's broker's compensation, because you have to take the number in the buyer representation agreement, because it could be different than what's in the listing agreement. That's the form. It just wasn't that version. We updated, there's a newer version. When you pull up the offer of cooperative compensation, that's the broker-to-broker form, it starts with what the buyer has agreed to pay the buyer's broker. Okay? Because when we saw that, and we said, well, that's wrong, because if I only ask for what's the listing broker's offering, that could be different, but I'm not allowed to accept anything in excess of what the buyer agreement said, then we need to start with the buyer agreement, not the listing agreement. Does that make sense? I'm sorry I thought when I was in here, I thought I pulled up the most recent version. So again, we've been changing these, so I've been trying to keep track. So it starts with what the buyer compensation is, and that's what you send to the listing broker to have signed. Okay? Yeah. Okay.
Real quick.
Okay.
Our CEO, Donnie, just texted me and said, before I ask questions, can you try to repeat the question a little bit?
I thought I was, but okay, I will do better. Sorry.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, in the back, sorry.
So we
there's a chance that we're charged more when we're really, so it's best to charge higher.
Well, again, that's a conversation you all are, the question is, can we charge, just put in a higher number in the buyer representation agreement? I think we answered that question earlier. There's upsides and downsides to that. You guys are going to have to talk about this amongst yourselves. I'm not getting into negotiating strategies here. I'm just not. That's outside my purpose here. So however you negotiate that and your negotiating strategies, that's something you are all going to have to work out amongst yourselves. Yeah.
My question is, does that form then disclose to the listing broker what the buyer broker has negotiated?
Does that, so the question is, does that disclose to the listing broker what the buyer brokerage agreement specifies? The answer is yes. You have to. If you're going to ask for something, you're going to have to tell them what you're asking for. So yes, absolutely. They're going to know what you have negotiated with the buyer. Yeah, there's no way around that. Absolutely. But, huh? Well, but there's no other way to do it. Look, if we end up not doing this, that's okay, right? That's only one option. Let's be honest about this. And there may be some things, but we're going to move on. And you may have other questions. And again, there was no way this is perfect, right? But you all are seeing all of the things that could happen, and that's definitely one of them. But look, you're going to see, well, do you see the other side's Alta sometimes anyway, right? So eventually you know what people got paid. Well, you know, so sometimes you do. I got to move on. Just hold that, because I think we need to get through them, 2 more forms, and then I'll take other questions. And excuse me. So if we get off of cooperative compensation for a minute, right, and we move into seller concessions, right, the second of the 3 potential sources of compensation. Really, the third, the buyer, we've had that conversation. I'm going to work like heck to get some or all of my compensation from either this listing broker or the seller, but in the eventuality I can't, you're going to owe me the difference at settlement, right? If there's cooperative compensation, I'm certain, and I know what it is, whether or not you're going to owe me the difference. As we talked about earlier, if it's less, if what the listing broker is offering is less than what you agreed to pay me, there's still another option, which is ask for seller concessions. Now, seller concessions take 2 forms. One is easy, seller concessions used to pay closing costs. We do that today. I don't know how common it is in this market, but around the state, it's pretty common. Depending on the other strengths of the offer, how many other offers I'm competing against, buyers often ask for closing help, right? They do. It's pretty common practice. Well, again, well, Montgomery County is special. We know that. Howard too. There are no concessions in Howard? Well, because of, you know, look, I really only want one thing. I'm not a very demanding person in general, but I really do hope that I live long enough to see the next buyer's market. You know, because in that buyer's market, this stuff, most of this wouldn't even be a conversation. Right? I mean, it would just have taken care of itself. But until we get more housing stock, until we get more inventory, until we get rid of these ridiculous, you know, inflation on housing costs and you know, where people can actually, the market becomes somewhat imbalanced, right? Which God knows when the last time that was, right after the recession, I guess. And then we got addicted to artificially low interest rates. Right? So the market is so skewed now, and it's still a seller's market, and it will be for the foreseeable future. But we're trying, if we get more inventory, and I went down to southern Maryland, there's new construction everywhere down there. I don't know if you've traveled down Charles County, Culver County, they're building these developments left and right, right? So at least some parts of the state, there's going to be more inventory online. And I think people who were locked in, I think some of those people are loosening up. They're putting houses, the inventory ticked up a little bit, right? So if we get to that place, I'm not saying a full-blown buyer's market, but a lot of this takes care of itself, doesn't it? You know, market-driven stuff. So, but as long as sellers have the upper hand, then things like seller concessions are going to be less frequent, right? And so here's the seller concession addendum that's for closing costs, okay, which is what you would probably use today. The problem with this is that there's a difference between concessions used to pay closing costs in general and concessions used to pay broker commissions. That's the difference, right? So you have to know the phrase interested party contribution, IPC, interested party contributions. And everybody knows that most loan products, there is a limit to the amount of seller concessions that a buyer can accept. FHA, it's what? 6%. Fannie and Freddie, 3. This is how I do it now. When the underwriter goes to analyze the loan and the contract, they need to know what those concessions are going towards. These closing costs are subject to the cap, whatever it is, right? All of the lenders on the federal side, at least, have told us, Fannie, Freddie, FHA, VA, USDA, have said seller concessions used to pay broker compensation are not subject to the cap. Seller concessions used to pay closing costs, not broker concessions, are subject to the cap. So you would use this form. If you want to use seller concessions to pay broker compensation, it's this form. This addendum. Now this goes in the offer. This is the addendum where seller concessions are going to be used to pay the buyer's broker. These concessions are not subject to the cap. So if you have concessions being used to pay closing costs and seller concessions to use to pay the buyer's broker, you need both forms. I will. Remember I said earlier there's something that I repeat 2 or 3 times? This is it. This is where I repeat myself several times. Seller concessions used to pay closing costs are subject to the cap. Seller concessions used to pay broker compensation are not subject to the cap. But you might need 2 forms. So we had the question before, well, what if the compensation is less than or more, let's say broker compensation is more, and I don't want to amend the agreement with the buyer. I'll just accept what we negotiated, but I don't want to leave money on the table. So most likely, you would just throw that into this addendum and help the buyer pay the closing costs, right? So you're not leaving money on the table. That's how I see this unfolding. But again, this is all conjecture on my part. We won't know until we have months, probably at least 6 months of experience with this. Yeah. Yes, the VA, now at least it's official, but it's not permanent. The VA has said that they will not enforce the rule against VA buyers paying their brokers. So you can now get the regular buyer representation agreement signed with a VA buyer, tell them the same thing. I'm going to work like heck so you don't have to pay me, but at the end of the day you might, and the VA said that they're going to not enforce that rule while they investigate the process for making it permanent. So that's That's good and bad. I mean, it's good that it gets the agreement signed, but at the end of the day, look, and there's a lot of VA buyers out there with a lot of money, right? I mean, they're like, well, I can afford to pay you. The VA won't let me. So, you know, I'm more concerned with like the young people, the first-time buyers, the ones that are really strapped for cash, you know? Because I don't know if you knew this, but NAR, look at NARs. It's a big document. It's the annual survey of home buyers and sellers. Has anybody ever thumbed through that? It's like a almost 200-page document. It's got a lot of stuff in there, but it's a lot of interesting stuff, where people get their money from. Do you know what the average age of a first-time buyer was in 2023? 37. Do you know what it was in 2013? 27. In 10 years, the average age of the first-time buyer went up 10 years. It's NAR's annual survey of buyers and sellers, home buyers and sellers. And you can get it on their website. You download it. It's a big PDF. It's like 150 pages. There's a lot of really good information in there. And it's nationally, so you have to take that into account. But they do some regional stuff, too. Okay? So those 5 forms, that's really it. And I apologize again for the confusion for pulling up the wrong form. But if you go to our website or pull it down otherwise, it's very simple. It just says, this is how much I'm asking. And it really starts with the buyer agreement, not the listing agreement. That's why we changed it. But hopefully, you know, it's self-explanatory once you pull it up. So again, sorry for that. Questions? I did. Okay.
Any response from like short sale lenders that want to pay the
Any questions? Any response from short sale about what difference? You're gonna lenders
yeah, lenders.
about the difference between what? I'm sorry.
What is that good, you know, because this price is not good for me, how always that is different. So if you have a short sale situation, most times short selling lender will not pay that because even though it's the buyer that will pay.
What's the difference between what? I'm sorry. I'm confused. The difference in compensation.
Yes, between what is offered, you do not throw offer.
Oh.
What I do not.
Well, we already know they're going to do what they want.
That's exactly.
Our ability to control them has never even been an option. So I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, this is the contract between the seller and the buyer. Why would they, you know,
Well, it is a contract. I don't disagree. I don't know the answer. I just don't. I'm sorry. Yeah.
If I'm viewing your listing and I don't know after August 17th about the compensation that's offered,
Right.
I can simply ask you as a listing agent, is the seller offering any commission?
Yeah. So the question is, it's at the 14th, not the 17th. If on or after the 14th of August, the compensation goes away, you know, even on existing listings, right? So on the 13th, I look at this listing, and the listing broker is offering 2.5% co-op, and on the 14th, it's gone, right? You can assume that the seller has agreed to the co-op, right? But I would definitely call the listing agent and say, yeah, still there, right? And then you send that form. If your buyer's interested in that, then you get that form signed memorializing that. Does that make sense? A simple phone call is fine, but you still have to take that next step and get that agreement signed between the brokers. It's not enough. It's not binding on them. A phone call is not binding on them once it's not in the MLS. Let's be real clear about this. It has to be in writing, and it has to be between the brokers that this is the compensation the listing broker has agreed to pay the buyer's broker at settlement. Be really clear about that. Yeah. No, that's concessions. That's seller concessions. That has nothing to do with cooperative compensation. No. Okay, that's seller concessions. That's completely different. That's, everybody really needs to understand, let's internalize this. 3 sources of compensation. Let's keep them separate in our mind. Cooperative compensation in the listing agreement, I confirm with the listing agent, and I send that agreement between the brokers. Yes, you are offering compensation, and here's what you agree to pay me as the buyer's broker. Seller concessions, fully negotiable, whether it's in that field or not in Bright, and it probably won't be. So if there is no cooperative compensation, or if it's not enough to pay your full compensation, and the buyer wants to include in the offer seller concessions to help pay the buyer's broker's commission, then you also include the addendum. And there's seller concessions used to pay closing costs, not compensation. So don't confuse those 3. They need to stand completely separate, and together, hopefully, my commission. But don't confuse cooperative compensation with seller concessions. Keep them completely separate. This is what I said at the very beginning. This is hard stuff. And to get an average buyer to understand this, it's going to be hard. And it's your only job. If you represent buyers, this is your job for the next 3 or 4 weeks. To get your scripts, to get the questions answered, to ask us if we have missed anything in these kinds of trainings, because this is the opportunity. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to go back to your desk and practice this. And I like the idea of having a friend and say, hey, let's you and I just sit. Because I just interviewed a buyer, and I was stuck. They were asking questions I wasn't sure how to answer. How would you answer it? Do this kind of back and forth. Help each other out. Because we've never done anything like this before. And again, there's going to be fits and starts, and it's an iterative process, like I said about the forms, for you too. You're going to try something, yeah, that didn't work. They had no idea what I was talking about. How do you have to dumb it down? Can you talk at a high level? What level can you talk to people at, right? That's going to change. Because you're going to talk to some people, let's be honest, they're pretty stupid. I mean, come on, right? I'm sorry, but they're not going to know what the hell you're talking about. So you're going to have to figure out a way to communicate with PhDs and high school graduates, which you already do. This is nothing new for you, right? You guys have dealt with everybody from every demographic, from every educational level. It's what you do. And you're going to have to bring those skills to bear, talk up their level in a way they can understand it, and be as clear as you can be. I really believe that's our job. Yeah.
So if you already have a listing, so does that mean you have to go back and change the,
Okay.
whatever?
Okay. At the very beginning, this is the first one we talked about, this listing agreement amendment. You have to get that signed before the 14th. Yes. It's the very first form we talked about. Okay. Yeah.
That form and the buyer request for sellers.
Mm-hmm. Yes. This is the wrong one. So I'm closing this. Look on the website, the buyer's request for that was the wrong one?
No, that was correct.
Okay. Well, shit, I just closed it, so I never mind that. Yeah.
The listing one.
The listing broker's offer, that was the wrong one.
Our conversation just got progressed faster than we went through the forms.
That form still
Yeah.
would be.
We still have the, right,
Yeah.
we still have the listing broker's offer.
Right.
That's the.
Right.
Communicate what wasn't right, and then the.
Yeah, that
Right.
makes sense. That
Right.
should be
And then this is the
that's the one you do with the offer.
intended to be part of.
Right. So, right. So you got the buyers.
No, one more.
Well, these are the only two I have left up. These are the only two I have because the other one was wrong.
No, what?
Yeah, it was. I promise you. This is for sellers. closing help. This is buyer's request for compensation of the buyer's broker.
That goes with the offer.
Both of these do. These are addenda to the contract. These are addenda to the contract. These are seller concessions.
Okay, so where's the
These are-
vehicle to let them know?
It was the wrong one. I don't want to show that because it's wrong.
Okay, but there is one.
Yes, it's on our website. It's everywhere. First of all, you have gotten this in the Realtor report, the thing that used to be the hot sheet. There's links to there. Another agreement, another one just went out with the addendum, with the amendments, to the listing and buyer representation agreement. All these forms are on our website. And I apologize for the confusion. But there is that other form I don't want to show because it was wrong. If there is cooperative compensation, the two brokers have to memorialize that agreement. That's, well, I thought so. Yeah.
On a listing, you can attach the URL to our personal website showing that we are giving compensation to the buyer.
In the buyer, in the agent remarks in Bright, you can include a URL, yes. And on the way you, so assuming the seller has agreed in the listing agreement to cooperative compensation, that has to be communicated somehow. On the website is the most obvious place to communicate compensation from the listing broker to the buyer's broker. That's the most obvious choice. Social media is another, because it's not connected to the MLS. And on the website, it can, or social media, offering 2.5% co-op, or whatever you want to say, or whatever that number is. Okay? And also a simple phone call that we hope the listing agent takes and responds to, or text message or whatever. But once that is, you have that information, you have to put it in that form and get the brokers to sign it. Otherwise, it's not binding until you have that agreement signed.
That does not go with.
That is not part of the contract, and it doesn't go into the MLS. That's between brokers. It goes in your files, and it goes to the title company, of course, because they have to know what they're paying out at closing. Okay? Right here. I'm sorry. Go, follow up.
Just the second part of the question, for the buyer's side, was submitting the offer, we have to also attach the buyer's request for compensation and the seller concession.
No.
There is
The agreement to compensate is between brokers. It's not part of the contract. It's not. It's not an addendum or an amendment. It's not part of the contract. It is a separate contract between the listing broker and the buyer's broker. You have it in your file. It is not an addendum to the contract. Don't put it in the offer because the brokers haven't agreed to it yet. It needs to be separate in the file and make sure the title company knows about it, but it's separate. It doesn't matter when it is. We don't know. You're going to tell us where is the best time, when is the best time to have that signed. I don't know. We've never done anything like this before. I have no idea. Yeah, look, all of this is. But, you know, so if it were me, I would wait a little bit. I wouldn't do it immediately. I don't even know if the buyer wants to see that property because, I mean, think about how this unfolds, and then I'll get with you, right? So you have a buyer and says, oh, I like this neighborhood. I can afford $450. I want 3 bedrooms. I would love a little yard. And this is my general 5-mile, 2-mile radius, whatever it is. And you pull up, let's just make it simple, 4 listings, meet their needs, right? Am I right? 2 of them, guess what? The listing broker's offering compensation. And I have confirmed that. Either the website, I call the listing agent, and I know they have an offer of compensation on the table, right? Well, now at least I know for certain that I might get paid. If the buyer ends up buying one of these two houses, yeah, I'm going to get paid, right? On the other two, they're not. Even today, there's some sellers that do zero in the right? So now we're going to have this tool to say, well, how about seller concessions? But now I have to get to the buyer and say, well, do you want to see all 4 of these houses? Because on the 2 that are offering compensation, yeah, I'm pretty sure, because and I'm going to get that agreement signed, right? And therefore, I'm going to know. Now on these 2, either the seller concessions box is empty, because I'm going to probably assume that's the way it is. There's going to be negotiation about my compensation. And if you want to include in your offer a seller concession to pay me as the buyer's broker, then I will help you do that. The problem with that is, of course, the buyer's not going to know till we're under contract what and if and to what extent the buyer's going to have to bring cash to close to pay my compensation. So there's a little uncertainty there until the very end of the negotiations. That's the biggest difference between, because I don't care whether the listing broker or the seller pays me, whether it's compensation, cooperative compensation, or concessions, or really at the end of the day, the buyer, as long as I get paid, right? And so I like to work on the behalf of the buyer to get paid by the listing broker or the seller. On this pile, the listing broker's offering it. On this, we're going to have to wait and negotiate with the seller for concessions to pay me. And we're not going to know till we're under contract or getting ready to sign, because I'm going to send over an offer that includes that addendum for the seller to pay the buyer's broker's compensation, right? I'm going to send that over, and I'm going to ask for everything. I'm going to ask for my full commission, right? As an addendum to the contract, right? It's just addendum number 1 to blah, 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 blah. Just the way you do any addendum today. And I'm going to ask for, I've agreed to pay 2.5%. The buyer has agreed to pay me 2%. And I want, you know what? I need, here's 2%. And then the first one, it might be 0, right? If there's no cooperative compensation, 0. Seller now, however, is agreeing to pay me 2.5%, right? I can ask for anything. When I get the counteroffer, now we're going to have to evaluate, and the seller's going to have to evaluate based on the relative merits of that offer in total, right? So if you lowball the seller and ask for compensation, are you going to get it? Depending on the market and the house and all that, right? So that's the conversation you're going to have with buyers. Assuming no cooperative compensation, what are my odds of getting it from the seller, and how does that fit in, and how does that affect the strength of the offer in total? And then I get the counteroffer back, and it's, they strike out 2.5, and they say 1.5. And I tell the buyer, look, do you have the cash to close? You owe me another %. You have to fit. We got to make up the difference. It's not coming from the listing broker, and the seller has changed that and countered at less than that. Now, guess what? Do you have the cash to close? Because you're going to owe me that % on top of all your other closing costs. You have the cash to close, right? Because I told you this would happen, or at least that it could happen. Remember when we signed this buyer representation agreement 2 months ago? This is the conversation we have. This should never be a surprise to the buyer that they may need that extra cash to close. This is the world we need to get used to. Buyers need to get used to the fact that they may need more cash to close than they thought to finish paying me. Because I worked for them. I worked my ass off for them. Right? And they're happy to pay me because I earned every dime. And, at some point, this is stuff we have to get used to. It just is. And that conversation, that first conversation with the buyer, is going to determine how successful I am 2 months later, when we're going through this and cobbling together my compensation. And I have to tell you, I hear it all the time. Oh, the poor buyers. Oh, the first-time buyers. I just talked about 37. Saddled with student loans. Blah, blah, blah. Somebody told me the other day that they were working with buyers, and their absolute limit was $400,000. And they're like, saw this house, and they loved it. It's like one of those reality shows when it's over your budget. You know what I mean? I'm tired of that. And it was like all of a sudden, oh, we can't afford it. That was our limit. We couldn't stretch any further. 2 days later, they called and said, we found the money. Let's make an offer. You know? And so, look, I am buying it, of course. I have daughters who struggled. They both are homeowners in their late 20s, early 30s, because I made them buy houses. Right? We have so many programs. They both use the Maryland Mortgage Program. One got her student loan debt canceled. The other one got 6% grant. Right? And we're in Baltimore City. They got additional money. They made money on the closing. They took a check away from closing. Right? So they're going to get used to it. It's going to be a shock. But guess what? They're saving up anyway. I hate to say this. It may take them longer. If they have to save up to pay us, if they have to save up more to pay us, that's going to be our new reality. Right? But we're resilient. We're going to make the best of it. But it's up to us to communicate all this to consumers where they are. And that's our job. You have 4 weeks to do it. It's a lot. It is a lot. I know that. One last question. I'm sure I am over my time. Well, that's good news, actually, because for the longest time, NAR was telling us lenders were not going to finance commissions. And I said, well, they already do. Right? I mean, they already do. It's baked into the sale price. And as long as it appraises, who cares? I would love to hear more of that. I would love to hear that lenders are more flexible and are willing to fold in to the loan some level of compensation that the buyer's going to owe me at settlement instead of them having to come up with that cold hard cash. I would hope lenders could see the value in that. And again, I've talked to several appraisers who tried to tell me, oh no, we can take that into consideration. Bull. We know they do. They don't even take into, I talked to an appraiser just the other day. He said, look, 5 years ago, we looked at the Alta, and we're like, we used to take off from seller concessions from our new valuations. He said, we don't even do that anymore. The appraisal price is the sale price, without adjustments for even seller concessions or commissions. And we know that the buyer did not really pay that amount. The buyer paid the sale price minus all of those things, commissions, closing costs, concessions. Appraisers aren't even really looking at that anymore. No wonder we're in this mess, right? So yeah, if lenders are willing to do that, and I've always said, as long as it appraises, who cares? And if lenders would take that approach, then yeah, I think we have an easier path, sure. But I haven't heard that officially yet. Okay? So, thank you all for having me. I really appreciate the time.
Is this on? Okay. Oh, wait, 1 second. Before we move away from the forms, I just wanted to say something I was thinking about while looking at these. Go back and read everything. I know these forms are not effective yet, but as we roll out all of these classes, as we re-watch the recording from today, as we go through the scripts, as we prepare for classes like Lynn will be holding here in the Bowie office, with the role playing and such, read through all of the changes and get to know the language that's in them so that you build that confidence and you know what you're talking about and you can explain it and answer those questions that your buyers and your sellers have. And look at the bottom and who's signing them. Who are the agreements made between? Because I think that will really, really help with understanding the listing broker's offer of compensation, the who's requesting what, who's agreeing to what, and where the either the separate agreements or the addenda to the contract fit into play. I think understanding those relationships really really will help to memorialize that and be able to recommunicate that.
And
to
they're broker
parties.
or authorized representative,
Yeah,
right?
yes,
So
yes.
you guys decide
And
who's
as-
an authorized
Yeah,
representative.
as you
right?
know, it's a brokers or your managers
manager,
need to
right,
sign off
right.
on those agreements,
Right.
right? And yes, as I mentioned, please take a look at Lynn's class on this Thursday. That's great.
Woohoo.
Yes. Thank you
My
very,
pleasure.
very much.
Yes, thanks for having
we
me.
really appreciate you coming out.